Hi, I'm Clever Ghoul, but you can call me Nikki. Welcome back to the channel. I've been wanting to do more projects with things I have at home. I have a craft closet with tons of things in it that I can pull from. So I went digging through my craft supplies and I found this miniature wooden coffin box that I bought last October at a craft store. Now I just love miniature scenes and I just thought it would be really fun to make one inside of this miniature coffin. So I pulled that out along with some miniature bushes, some rocks, a Dollar Tree skeleton, and I got to work. This is more of a follow my process video instead of a tutorial. So with that being said, let's get into it. First, I really started thinking out how I wanted to do this. I knew that I wanted to have a little pond in the center. I knew I wanted to have some dirt or sand along the sides, some green grass, some bushes, some rocks. And I knew I wanted to use the skull as a feature within the water itself, but I wasn't quite sure if it would just be a boulder or how I wanted to go about using that. So instead of really thinking about it too much, I just dove right in and started making the water. To do that, I took out some aluminum foil, pressed it down inside of the coffin, and then with a Sharpie, roughly drew out how I wanted the water to look. Then I took out that miniature skeleton from Dollar Tree, pulled the skull off, and placed it on top of that tracing to see where I wanted that skull to sit around the water. Then I traced around that so I knew where to leave room for the skull later on. Next, with the glue gun, I traced the outline of the pond that I had made, and then I filled it in. Once that was set, I removed any of the foil around the edges, placed it down inside of the coffin, and traced it with a Sharpie so that I knew where it would go later on. Now, I knew I wanted to stain the coffin itself as well as the skull, and I knew that both would involve using the color brown, so I decided to kind of do both at the same time. I mixed some brown acrylic paint with water and went over the coffin in washes, wiping off any excess to try to build up a stain. I didn't want to do an opaque layer of paint here. I wanted some of that woodish texture to kind of come through still, so that's why I didn't just go directly in with the paint. While that first layer of paint was drying down on the coffin, I pulled out my skull, sanded it down, removing any parting lines, and then applied the same brown wash of paint over the skull so it looked a little bit more aged. From there, I decided I wanted the coffin to have a little bit more of a red tone to it, so I mixed some burgundy, brown, and deep gray together along with some water and went in and did a few more washes of paint all over the coffin. From there, I decided it was time to paint the pond. I started by mixing peacock blue and brown together to get kind of a murky pondish color, and with a wet brush went all over the hot glue. Once that was dry, I went in with that same color and deepened the edges of the pond. Next, I pulled out some lime green and lightly added a wash in the middle of the pond, dabbing it off, blowing it with a hairdryer, then adding a little bit more until it had the right amount of brightness that I wanted. Then I mixed the peacock blue, the brown, and the lime green together, again to go back in around the edges and anywhere that I felt needed a little bit more of a deeper color. I added one last little bit of lime green in the center to brighten everything, and then I pulled out a festive metallic green and went over and made some ripples and some highlights in different areas, adding in a little bit of glitter and a little bit of slimy, oozy color to the pond. Once everything was dry, I pulled out the Mod Podge Dimensional Magic, coated the surface with it so that the pond will be shiny, and then left that to dry overnight. Before stopping for the day, I pulled out some tacky glue, put it along the sides and bottom of the coffin, and poured in some sand, tapping out any excess into a cup on the side just to get a dirt layer going. The next day, once everything was dry, I repeated a similar step, but this time instead of sand, I used grass. I put tacky glue inside of the coffin, would pour a little bit of the grass in, tap out any excess, and move around the entire coffin until it was to my liking. I had decided that I wanted the skull to have water running from its eyes so that it was kind of going into the pond I had made. So I pulled out the skull, put it on top of the water, and then drew roughly with a Sharpie where the water would flow from on its face. Then I took out some hot glue, traced over that spot, and let that dry. And once that was set, I covered those lines in a wash of peacock blue, and then again with a little bit of that festive metallic green to kind of pull in the colors from the pond into the tiers. Then I coated those tiers with Dimensional Magic and let that dry. Now that I had the dirt and the grass in this coffin, I wanted to add in the water. So I took a little bit of hot glue, put it on the back of the pond, and pressed it down and held it in place while it set. Once the pond, sand, and grass were all down, I pulled out some rocks and placed them inside of the coffin to figure out how I wanted them to sit. Then I would pull each one out one at a time, add some hot glue, and then press them down into place. Then I added the skull, and lastly, it was time to add in some bushes, which I would pull out, place inside of the coffin, and rearrange until it looked how I wanted it to. And then I would take 1 to 3 out at a time, put down some hot glue in that spot, and put them back in place, going all the way around the coffin. Lastly, I did a few final touches off camera, which means it's time for the reveal. Here it is. As you can see, I added some more of that grass into the top of the coffin lid, just kind of tying everything together and making it a little bit more cohesive. It felt a little boring and plain to be left alone, so I like that this touch kind of marries the two sides together. I've actually never made fake water before, so I was really impressed with how this turned out, and I have more ideas on how I would improve it in the future. Maybe adding in some resin or some other kind of clear building gel like they use for nails to sculpt in some ripples or make it more three-dimensional. But for now, I'm really glad with how this turned out, and I think it does a good job of looking like a pond, but having a little bit more of a mystical, weird coloring to it that just looks so good with the skull. I gotta be honest, this was really fun to make. It's a project that I've been thinking about doing for a while and it kind of forgotten about. So when I went into my craft bin and I saw all these little pieces together and it finally clicked in my head how I wanted to make this look, I was really excited. The coffin itself is fairly plain from the outside. It's something that you might see on someone's shelf and then be surprised when you open it up to see this little landscape inside, and that's exactly what I was going for. As a kid, I was a really big Polly Pocket fan, and I'm talking about the really tiny ones from the early to mid 90s. I really love making spooky miniatures. It's something I've done a lot in the past, and I would love to do something more ornate or more detailed in the future, almost more like a real Polly Pocket. This wasn't the right project for that, but maybe it's something we'll do in the future. Speaking of, if you were gonna make your own Polly Pocket inspired set, what would you do? I'd love to know, so tell me in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!